Hi guys, welcome to this class. Now, here in this class, we're going to be talking about variables. It's going to be an introductory class to variables, just so we can explain simply what they are. Now, variables are extremely common in blueprints. In fact, in blueprints, you're always going to have some form of variable. So, because we're going to be seeing them quite a lot, it's really important that we understand what they are now and how they work. And as we progress in the course, we're going to add more detail to our knowledge on what a variable is and what it can do. So, what is a variable? Well, simply put, variables are properties that hold a value or reference an object or an actor in the world. These properties can be accessible internally to the blueprint that contains them, or they can be made accessible externally so that their values can be modified by us or whoever's working on the project. Hence the name variables. So it allows you to put a reference inside the blueprint where you can edit, adjust, or maybe like use a slider to adjust the outcome of what it is you're referencing, such as we use variables for a variety of things. Give you some examples of where you might use them. It could be some coordinates, it could be colors, it could be an actor, how big an actor is. It can be so many different things, but it allows you to put the reference to that object, actor, or reference inside the blueprint here on the event graph. Okay. And then you can edit the properties internally or externally. Variables are very similar to perhaps what you used in maths. If you remember when you're back at school, when we're working out equations, so the equation was the unique information and it changed the result, didn't it? And that's similar to how variables work in blueprints. So, following this principle, we'll be able to create several different blueprints. One example, perhaps, would be a door blueprint, which has the ability to rotate the static mesh, being the door, and it rotates it when the character approaches it. So, what is the variable? In that case, the variable would be the degree of which the door opens. So, we might be able to open it 90 degrees, we might be able to open it 30 degrees, or we might be able to open it 180 degrees if we wanted to, okay? So, that is the variable. And we can tell Unreal Engine that we want it to rotate within those parameters. Make sense? So another type of variable is a static mesh. Let me just drag this here. So we've got this static mesh all good to go. And this represents a static mesh in our scene. It can be anything really. We'll talk about it a bit more later. It doesn't really matter which static mesh is being represented here. But this variable is our equation. And we're going to put a static mesh in there so we can change it here to whichever static mesh that we want. And we will be able to, once we put any static mesh in, we'll be able to apply the same rotation controls to it. So the function is always going to be the same. What changes is the values that we use. So the values are the variables. Now we have some types of variables that are slightly different. However, let me show you the most common types. The most common types are the value variables. Let's do this in practice. Let me just delete this variable and we'll create it here, create a new one. And here's where we have all our blueprint variables listed. So every time we go to add a component to our hierarchy, it creates it here. And then below here, we have the ability to reference it. So it's not specifically the actual component itself, but it is a reference. Now that's one thing that we're going to be learning in Unreal quite a lot here, referencing objects, okay? So as you can see, I've been able to drag in the point light, which I've dragged in as a variable, and it's referencing the mesh that I've put in the hierarchy above, or the actor rather. So this is just an abstract concept, but it just gives us a sense of how it all works, okay? So variables reference the actor or the mesh in the hierarchy that I've added as a component. Let's create a new one here, and I'll call this one, just for demonstration purposes, integer. Okay, cool. So we've got that now. And when I click it, and it opens up the details panel, doesn't it? So here we have some more options. Let me just open it up so we can see it a bit better. So this is the variable name here, and this is the type of variable that we have just there. And here in the drop down menu, you can see that there are quite a lot of different types of variables that we can use. The most common ones are listed first, and then they're separated by category below. And if you want to explore them in your own time, of course, feel free to do so. There are quite a few, aren't there? Now, it's obviously something we're not going to be able to have time to go into in depth in this course, but there are quite a lot that you can explore at your leisure. And they're also listed in subcategories under the categories too. But because the idea of all this course is just to focus on introducing you to the principles of blueprints and the ones that are specifically useful to architectural visuals, then we're going to just focus on those ones, okay? So if you're not going to create something that needs this variable, you're never going to use it, it's better if you understand how it works at least within Unreal. And then when you do need to create something, you know exactly what you're looking for, okay? So hopefully what we show you, you'll be able to put it into use, if not now, at some point in the future. So let's show you how these could work. So we've got an integer here, and at the bottom we have a default value, and it says under here that every time you create this, you're going to need to compile the blueprint. You get that message telling you that. So we have to compile, and then we get the option to affect the value. So let me just drag it into a scene integer. And just in case you didn't get what I did before, to add variables into our blueprint, we have them on the left hand side, and we just click and drag them onto the event graph. Okay, so you just click and let's just drag it on, and it gives us some options here to get the integer or to set the integer. Now later on we'll talk more about what set means, but for now let's just use get, and we'll use it to bring in our variable, and then we can demonstrate what it can do. Let me just create a print string, our well-known print string node that we've been using. And let me set it to 10 seconds of duration. Great. And then if you remember in the other classes, we typed in the value here, didn't we? You can also add variables to it as well. And this is actually one of the most important uses of print string. And we're going to be using it quite a lot because it helps us to analyze different functions, what's happening in our blueprints, okay? So if we ever want to move an object within our scene, sometimes we might push play and it doesn't move, or it moves to the wrong side and we don't understand why. Sometimes if we add a print string to the process, we can figure out what the problem is, okay? So it's really helpful in allowing us to debug successfully. So I'm just going to use a print string and connect it here, and it gives us a new node here, which is a conversion node, which is basically converting a numerical value into text. So it's reproduced here. Now compile and save and push play, and the integer value is shown here in the screen. You see that? It's set as 0. So if I change the integer value to 2 in the details panel, and then compile and save, then the number 2 is shown here, okay? So what is an integer variable? Well, it's a whole number, an integer number. So we can't have decimal numbers. We can have only 0, 1, 2, 3, or negative numbers like -1, -5, -200. But we will always have integer numbers, but never decimals, okay? So I'll push play here so we can preview it. 200, okay, that's showing up fine. And this is the variable that has a whole number. Now, another type of variable is the float type. Let's have a look at that. Let's click and drag it into the scene. And we can see it automatically brings up the details panel. I'll change this to the float type. Now it's asking me if I want to change the variable since I'm changing its type. And this happens because I already had a variable inside the scene. Now, when I drag it here, it's already in our program. So when I want to change it, it says, well, you're changing the type of variable you're using. This could affect your programming. So when I say I accept the change, then it calculates everything, calculates all the programming line again to see if there are any errors that are occurring. It's like it compiles it all over again just to see what will happen. And one thing we can see here is the color's different, isn't it? All the integer variables have this lighter green color, almost like an emerald green. And then the floats have this brighter green, like a lawn, a grass color. Let's compile and save. And here we can see this value showing up. We have a float type variable. What is the type variable? It's a numerical variable, but it works with a decimal now. So you can see you can put 0.0 if you want, or 1.2, for example. We're not limited just to using whole numbers. So let's place it here and we'll push play. And the same thing, pretty simple, right? 1.2 showing up. So integer gives us the whole numbers, and the float works with decimals. I'll create another variable here called a Boolean. Now, this type of variable is really pretty cool, actually. So when I click to create a new variable, it gives me a type of variable I used previously. That's why there is this exchange, okay? So let's just make sure we add it as a Boolean, compile and save. And let's set it to our scene. And again, what do we see? The color's different, isn't it? So the Boolean types are red. Now, here we don't get to see a number in the details panel. So what's shown here is a condition. And we can see that when we run the mouse over it, it shows as either to be true or it shows to be false if I disable it. So what happens here? Well, this Boolean variable will tell me if a condition is true or false. It's as simple as that. And this is used quite a lot in blueprints. And it's really useful for us to help us to determine whether something's on or off, okay? Whether a door's open or not, okay? So it's a really good one to use a Boolean, basically saying that it's a yes or a no, true or false. If it's true, it's going to execute a function. If it's false, it won't execute, okay? So let's just illustrate what I mentioned before about detailing every step of Unreal so it understands what we want it to do. Let's suppose that you've got this scene and the door is closed. And if the character approaches the door, it should open, right? Now let's suppose you approach the door and you notice the door is closed. So what should happen is it should open when you walk to it with the character. It should rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. But what if you walk into the scene and the door is already open? And then the function is trying to open the door with the character when he's in close proximity, but the door's already open. Well, you might find that it still tries to open the door even though it is already open. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, it's either going to give you an error or nothing's going to happen, since it's not going to be able to open what's already opened. So this is just an example, but it just illustrates the point that you can create a function that determines when a character approaches a place, and you create a function that works like the Boolean. It verifies the condition or the state that we find before us. So, for example, the Boolean can store information within the variable, a bit like this. Let's suppose you approach the door and you're basically trying to work out, is the door already open? Well, if it's open, the state or condition in the Boolean is going to be true. Because yes, it is open. It is true. So then you want the function of closing the door. You want that to work, don't you? So if I ask, is the door open? And the door's shut, then the condition is going to be no. It's going to be false. It's not open. And then I want it to execute the action to open it. Got it? It's pretty simple, really. And when we talk about it in that way, it seems quite obvious. But we need to make sure that Unreal understands that so that our blueprint works as it should. So you may change a condition so that it can be clear for the engine to solve. You can bring out the print string over here. It's going through the node, isn't it? So we don't want that. So let's put a reroute in there. Cool. Just so it looks better visually. Nice. So let's press play, see what happens here. So here we can see it says false. The condition's false. So why is that? Because we haven't ticked it here. It's not enabled that. Let's enable it and compile and play. So now it says true. And that's it, basically. So the print string is helping us to understand what's happening in the blueprint, and we can see it on the screen. This is really helpful when we create bigger blueprints as well. It helps us to work out visually what exactly is going on, save some confusion as well. All right, so I will show you another node, and that'll be quite useful. I'm not going to show you all of them because there's far too many, but I'll show you this other node, which we use a lot in ArcViz, and this one is vector. So we type vector there, and we'll put that here, and we'll compile and save, and we'll add it to our scene. Nice. Okay, there we go. So this is our vector node. And a vector is just another type of variable, but in this case, this vector has 3 coordinates, x, y, and z. So within this variable, I have these coordinates of x, y, and z, which are going to be really useful for us. So here's our variable, and it joins 3 floats or 3 integers. You can have, for example, 3 variables for each coordinate, and you can use them in your blueprint coding. It makes it a lot easier because sometimes you don't have all the coordinates. You might optimize your blueprint. Now, I'll add it here, connect it that way. And here, I'll just add 10, 20, and 30 and compile. And let's just push play. Okay, cool. So here it shows X10, Y20, and Z30. Okay. Basically, this is what it does. But of course, there's more to it than just simply showing us numbers. A really cool aspect of it is that we can perform mathematical tasks with these variables, okay? So let me give you an example of that. I'll show you now what it does. Let's have a look. So let's use an integer variable, the one we already have, and I'll add this again, and its value will be 200. And I'll create another one, integer 2. Okay, and I can change the type of variable to make it easier. I'll just change it there, and I'll compile and use its value of 100. Now, let's suppose at a certain point of your programming, you have to sum up 2 numbers or subtract or multiply. Well, you'll use this a lot for mathematical tasks in Blueprint, in programming in general, actually. So suppose you have to add up or add up maths. The engine will interpret mathematical calculations, and all these things we see, the visual part of it, all of these actually involve many mathematical calculations just to create the visual element that we see. So maths is really important. It's not complex maths, but you're going to be using maths quite a lot in Blueprint. So let's suppose that for some reason we want to add up these 2 numbers. Okay, so what do I have to do to add them up? Well, we can click here and drag it, and it will open this window, and I can type in the plus sign and I've got all these different operations that will show up. So here we can add the operation of plus. In older versions of Unreal, I think it was named differently, but the function is the same. So we have a new node, which is added here for mathematical operations. Every node you add will always bring in a text of what each node does. So here it adds an A and a B. So what does that mean? Well, it means I've got a variable of an A and a variable of B. Okay, so it will add them up and then deliver a result, right? So I just have to connect them here and here, and it will add up this number, and it will show the results here. And then I'll connect this to our print string, and hopefully, if it all works, then we'll see what happens, whether we get the correct value. Okay, let's push play. Cool, so we get 300. So it's adding 200 plus 100, giving us that simple mathematic result of 300. So let's follow the same principle and do a subtraction. Let's add them in together, plug them in. Let's connect all. So it should be 200 minus 100 equals 100. Same thing goes for multiplying. This time we put the multiply sign. It gives us that no, we plug it all in. So it should be 20 times 200. There we go. So really, really useful tool just to illustrate that. We can do division as well. We can do division, a slash will divide and play. So it's 200 divided by 100, right? Which equals 2. And that's it. So we will be using that quite a lot. Usually they're easy calculations like adding or subtracting. We may want to add up a location or different things in our scene. So let me just demonstrate that. We can use this float for a variable too. It works the same, but with just decimals. For Boolean, it won't work because it's a condition. It's like on or off. But let's create a vector operation so you can see it. So I'll create another vector, vector 2. Change that to vector. Cool. And put it into our scene and compile. And here I'm going to use 10, 20, and 30. And here I'll use 5, 10, and 15. Okay. So we have two vectors then with different values, and I can just add them up. So do you see how it changed the node already? It's already assumed that we want it to be the vector type, and then it opens up these three options. So I can connect these and go to the print string, and let's push play and see what happens. So here I have 15, 30, and 45. So let's interpret this. I have a variable in x is 10, which will then add up to 5, or variable 2. In other words, it adds up the vector's value no matter what the coordinates are. So it adds up x with x, y with y, and z with z. So I have 10, 20, 30, and it adds up to 5, 10, 15. 10, 10, 20, 10, 30, and 30, 15, 45, which is the result here, 15, 30, 45. Okay? Cool. So that is it for the basic operations. Now later on, we can make more progress on this and develop it further. Now I just want to talk about the topic that I mentioned at the start of this video, that concept of get and set. Remember that? Let me just clear out this blueprint so it looks a bit cleaner for us. Cool. So what's the difference here? Well, let me drag this into the scene. So I dragged and dropped it, and now it asks, do you want to get or set? So this blueprint is asking for get or set. What do I need to do? Well, set will configure this value. So let's suppose I want to use set here. So now what happens? What happens is it opens a new kind of node, and it has a node with flow control, which means that I have the option or the ability to connect this to a previous event and then follow up with our flow the other side as well. So this variable here has a value of 200, but here it shows 0. So what does set do? Well, here's the answer. It changes the value of this variable, picking it from the flow. Okay? So, for example, its initial value is 200, but I, as the programmer, want to change this value. I want it to be 100, right? So let's see what happens if I connect these two. So we're following the flow, connecting it to the print string. I can type in the value here or add another variable for example. So we have our integer 2 here, and I'm changing the value of the variable integer to the value of the variable integer 2. Okay? So what happens next is that from this point of our programming line, this variable will have a value of 100 instead of 200. So this variable's value is 200 from here to here, and then here it changes, and from here to there it's 100. And this is used quite often. Sometimes you have a variable that you don't have a specific value for in the blueprint, but it will be altered based on other events, and that will take place in the blueprint. So this is set, and that's used very often in programming. Here there is an entry input value and the exit output value. Okay, so I'll do an exercise here actually, just to show you that I can add it here, and it shows the exit output value, which is 100. Let's recap though on what an integer does. So we can set 200 here as our value, but we can also change it halfway to 100. When we press play, it's showing 100, right? Pretty cool. So that's how we can use set. We can use set in a variable. We can adapt it, for example. It could be in the case of the movement of a character. I can use a variable which is the position of the character. That could be quite handy, especially for each moment. I can add it and change the object, change how it's anchored, its position. In case of a vector, for example, I may have a set here. If I use a set, then I could perhaps change the position of this variable depending on the position of the character. So I can change this in real time, right? Coming back though, we have the exit value, but at the same time, I want to do something different. Well, I'll bring in the integer, which is our variable itself, but with get, and then I'll add it here. So you can see if I push play now, you can see 100, right? So you might be asking, so why is that? Doesn't it show 200 here? Shouldn't it be 200 on screen? Well, no. Why not? Because of our information in the flow. From this point to this point, the value of our integer variable is changed to 100. Because I've changed it, haven't I? I've changed it, and it's changed the value here as well. So if, for example, I have a program line here and I change this value and then use different one here, our programming will take on what it says here. So from this point, it carries the variable as 100. So let's see this in practice. Let's print the screen and drag it here. We're going to reverse the order. Okay, so let's leave this here for now. And what I'll do is I'll add an integer. So get it, and I'll connect it to the print string here. Let's organize our control flow. Okay, nice. Cool. So let's push play, and it's going to print string with the integer variable, right? Then I'll create a delay, and that node that is the one we used earlier, the delay one. There we go. It's got a 5-second delay in there by default. No, sorry, 0.2 by default. I'll add 5 and I'll connect that. Now let's push play and see what happens. Compile and play. Here we go. So 200 is what it's showing first. There should be a 5-second delay. Do you see that? So what happened here? Well, let's see if we can just understand it a little better. Let me go back here and just move that so we've got a bit more room. Cool. Okay. So this is an event that's activated by pushing the play button. I pushed the play button, the event was activated, and it went to the next node here. And I want to print a string with the value of the variable integer. But what's its value? It's 200. Okay, so it will print 200 to screen. And then we'll wait for 5 seconds. Then it will change the value of the integer variable and it will print again onto screen. Now, let's remove this delay so we can see how it works. See? 200. That's what I have mentioned about things happening simultaneously. They happen in order, but practically simultaneously. So let's go back. Okay, so what is it doing? We push play, it prints the integer variable value. 5 seconds later, it then alters the integer's value and prints again. So when I push play, there we go, it's printing the integer variable's original value. 5 seconds later, it prints a new variable value. And this is what these get and set functions are used for. Okay, so get, what does it do? It brings in our variable as it is, and set brings the option of altering this variable's value. Okay, so we can use either get or set in our blueprint methods. It doesn't really matter. We've now used both so you can see how they work, and hopefully that gives you a better idea of how you might decide to use them. However, it's key that we just bear in mind the flow as well, so we can see how things are working with the control flow. That's it then for the class on variables. I thought we'd just cover the basics and we'll continue to increase our knowledge and understanding in future classes. Okay, so see you in the next class.